Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome to another live stream episode. Um, thanks Christoph for reminding me Knöpfe drücken. I've already done that, so we are ready to go. And today it's about a really interesting topic, and honestly, I thought a lot about what I actually should cover in today's live stream. And because this is such a huge topic, when we are building home labs, how do we plan it? And the topic is all about like, how do you find a good way to set up this stuff in the home lab without messing it up and make sure that you avoid running into stupid mistakes, such as I sometimes do when I try out some new builds and systems. And in the end, I sometimes find out, well, that didn't work the way I expected it to work, and I have invested a shitload of money into a new main board, and that doesn't work well together with my storage controller or the network, whatever. I've made many mistakes like this, and I thought it is such an important topic to talk about. How do you plan your projects, especially in a home lab? And I thought, let's open this. Let's discuss it in a live stream, and so I can give you some more context. And we might also talk about some funny stories and some behind the scenes that are things that happened to me, and you can also learn from my mistakes as well. So, hey, guten Abend. Good evening, everybody. Great to see some familiar names here. Hello from Portugal, Fernando. Guten Tag, Light Lotus. A lot of German people here. I mean, that's kind of expected, of course, but it's great to see. And also, hi to everybody coming from all over the world. It's so amazing to see that I have such a great community from all over the world. So many different places where I get messages or people writing in the chat. It is super exciting. And hi, hi from Brexit. They're also nice. Very, very cool. Light Lotus is British, actually, but you speak some German. That's nice. Cool. All right. Technically, I'm Jamaican, but live in the UK. Oh, nice. Cool. Interesting. Yeah, that's really amazing. Before I buy hardware, I find a victim, aka YouTube streamer, to review it for me, Christoph said. Yeah, that's actually a pretty good idea. I mean, and I do that myself as well. So if I'm planning to buy something new, I just give it a shot on YouTube or on Google and see whether I can find something interesting and what others have tested and said about this. And this is always a great idea. By the way, we could also maybe talk about the future of hardware reviews or the future of review builds on this channel, because I don't have a real plan how I'm going to handle it in the future. So it would be great to have your opinion on this as well. And maybe in the end we can also make it in terms of an open Q&A session. I've just recognized there's a new button on the YouTube live stream that allows me to engage with my audience and start a Q&A, whatever will happen then, but I might just try it out later and see what it does. So I suppose that you can send me some questions in the chat, because it's sometimes a bit hard to keep up with all of the messages I got in the comment section here on this live stream. But if there are some specific questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll do from time to time address some of those. Not every, because it's just too much, certainly, but it's always great to get some feedback from you guys. And whatever question you have, feel free to put it in chat, and we might just talk about some of those. All right, perfect. So one thing I also wanted to say is about how I'm planning to schedule those live streams. Apparently you have seen that I switched this schedule a bit to a bi-weekly schedule, so every other week I'll try to go live on YouTube. I'm not planning to do it every week because, honestly, it's very exhausting. And it also allows me to spend a little more time into the thought process of what exactly is it that I want to talk about today. Because if I just go live every week, it will become something like a random thing, and I don't want that because I just recently saw in the statistics and numbers of those live streams that you guys enjoy when I prepare a topic that I'm going to talk about. And I think this is also a much better experience for people when you're watching the recordings of the live streams. So let's keep it like every other week. Yeah, let's not make it weekly. Every 2 weeks, I'm gonna try to come live on YouTube, and that will be with a prepared topic. I've written down some notes for today as well, so that probably is a much better experience, and it also gives you a better value when I come up with at least something that kind of makes some sense. So I try to do my best to come up with a good topic every other week. But if you have any suggestions for future live streams and you want to talk about certain topics, feel free to put it in the Discord. Please not in the chat of the live stream because I'm not going to keep track of it, but you can send me a DM on Discord, or you can also put it in the chats. By the way, if you want to support me, if you want to support the community, make sure to join the Discord. Reach out to other IT professionals and other Homelab enthusiasts if you want to talk with us about it, and as well take a look at the Patreon page. It would be so cool to get your support. It's always helping me to create all this free content for you guys. Okay, cool. Thanks. I hope that was kind of a good introduction. I think it was a bit long, but anyway, let's get back to topic and talk about Homelab planning. Just reading your message in the chat, Christoph. Töpferkurs mit Christian? Probably not. It's gonna be like, I can't do that, actually. It reminds me of that movie, like, do you know, I don't actually know how this is, how this movie name is in English. Is it Ghost? I think it's Ghost with what is it, actor's name? Patrick Swayze? That reminds me of that a bit. That is what it would look like, Christoph, actually. So, yeah. Okay, guys, so let's get back to topic. Let's talk about Homelab planning. I've already talked a bit about why exactly should you plan your Homelab projects. And Homelab planning, for me personally, involves a couple of different things. It's not just what exactly is your next project, but also in terms of future projects. And it includes many different areas for me, such as hardware, but also software and also workflows. So that means hardware, what device are you gonna buy? You're gonna want to buy a new mainboard, a case, a power supply. Does it all fit together, and does it actually work together? And it's really important to plan those things. Otherwise, you end up just buying a bunch of different pieces, and you might waste a lot of money if it doesn't work together. But also software is. So what exactly are you planning to run on those servers? What type of operating system is it? But also applications that you're setting up. And all those things, I'm carefully planning whenever I start a new Homelab project. We also talk later about how exactly do I do the planning. So how do I write up and keep notes and all of that stuff. But for me, just recently, and this is probably one of the most important things that I just recently started to write down much more, is like the workflows. So what type of workflows do I have in my Homelab? And these are really underestimated a lot when it comes to Homelab planning. It's also underestimated in general by a lot of Homelab creators. Because I will tell you why I think workflows are so much important. Workflows are really, like, they define the way how you interact with your Homelab, because the bigger and bigger your Homelab gets, the more projects you're installing, the more complicated it gets, and you kind of like forget to do things. For example, I just recently started to add a new virtual machine on my Homelab, and I just immediately noticed, okay, so when I create a new VM, I probably should have a DNS record for it. I should make sure that it is a static IP address that is not used by any other device. I should create a firewall rule for it. But wait a second, if I install another application, I also want to add it to my Homelab dashboard. But wait a second, I also need to connect it to my authentic IDP so I can securely authenticate. And all of those things, right, they add up the more and more projects you have. And I'm currently at a situation where I have so many things in place and I'm kind of losing track of everything. So I started to think about, well, when we're talking about Homelab planning, we also need to talk about the workflows. So if you're setting up new things, what are the different steps involved into all those setup processes? And how do you actually do the auditing of those services? Maybe you installed a service like 1 or 2 years ago. You probably should actually review it at some day and find out if it still has the latest updates or if there are things that you can improve and so on. So there are really so many areas when it comes to Homelab planning, and I'm already realizing right now I probably can't address each and everything that we have to do in this live stream here, but I'm planning to think more about those different topics. The more, I'm having those kind of challenges in my own home lab, and of course I'm creating videos and dedicated tutorials based on all those things here. But yeah, that is for me personally Homelab planning. And yeah, we already talked about some why it is so important. Avoiding unnecessary costs, hardware investing, but also like power consumption in the long run. A good planning helps you to do things easier and research applications. It's important to keep track of all those progresses and workloads. And of course, a good planning also makes sure that you don't run into stupid mistakes and might get affected by data loss and so on. Yeah, so that's especially important when we're talking about like self-hosting applications. I know a lot of people love to host or maintain their own password managers or mail server systems. But what happens if there is an error because you messed up something and you didn't plan the backup in a good way? And yeah, that could actually do you some painful damage. So therefore, it's really important to think about all those areas. Okay, so I try to keep up with the chat, but honestly, it's really hard. So at the end, I will do a Q&A session, and you can, in the end, like put a few questions in the chat, and I probably have a bit more time going through all of this. But yeah, it's great to see you guys if you have an open discussion with each other and help out each other with other people in the chat. That is also really nice. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you, guys. Okay, cool. So, one thing I have to say before we dive into the specific areas of Homelab planning, I also would say like there are two really important, I would call them something like golden rules that I found out for myself. And I really thought a lot about it. And I think it's really important to address those. For example, one thing that is really, really important when we talk about Homelab planning is you don't have to build a perfect system. So don't try to overthink everything. Just because we're talking about Homelab planning and why it's so important, at the same time, you also have to realize, well, a Homelab is always changing. Mistakes happen along the way. It's a natural part of the progress. So that doesn't mean that planning is unnecessary, but it means that you don't really have to overthink everything and don't try or don't aim to make it perfect from day one. That is not really the goal of a Homelab, at least in my opinion, it is not. So this is why I believe, like, although we try to plan everything in the best possible way, at some point you just have to stop and say, okay, yeah, I'm just trying it out. And that's what I want to say. Yeah, mistakes happen. We love to build things. We love to break things because we're learning from fixing them. And yeah, running a Homelab is basically that part of the progress and doing it all over again. And yeah, that's also the enjoyable part. So accept that some things aren't perfect from day one, and just accept that although you're trying to plan as much as you can, at some day, well, yeah, at some point you have to accept some mistakes. Also, what is really important when you're talking about Homelab planning, and I found it just recently found that out for myself, is that the requirements are really important. So you have to define your own requirements. And this is especially important when it comes to sizing, right? And you should have a clear vision of what you actually want to achieve. And I can tell you, that was a pretty big mistake that I did in the beginning. Like, if I wanted to make it perfect because I was inspired by all those amazing Homelab creators on YouTube, like, all the guys like Tom Lawrence, Techno Tim, Learn Linux TV, Network Chuck, all those guys, yeah. And sometimes I even watched some videos from Linus. And those guys are really crazy. They build really big home labs with all those different professional server equipments, and it just looks amazing. And I thought, well, I have to do that myself, right? I need to get a server rack. I need to build a massive storage server to just keep up with them. And in the end, that was a pretty big mistake, because I never really set myself the correct requirements, right? Because my requirements are actually not that high, right? I don't need a big storage, because I'm mostly like, I don't have any movies or any like TV shows that I'm trying to stream from my server to my TV or something like that. I'm really not a friend of like hosting those things on my own, because of piracy reasons and all of that stuff. So I'm really like more in the subscription model of Amazon Prime, Netflix, and so on, right? So I don't really need a big storage pool somewhere in my home lab, yeah. So that is one requirement where I really thought, well, if I'm hosting storage, it might be in most situations it's just a very small application storage, like for my containers, that I have a network storage around for storing a database and so on, but they never really grow in any big, right? So I can really keep it small and bring it a bit down to earth. And probably the only way, or the only use case for a bigger storage pool would be in terms of storing B-rolls and storing A-rolls for my YouTube videos, right? But I just realized that keeping all those data isn't as important as I thought it would be. I mean, once the video is done, I never really do anything with those older projects. Maybe like I want to keep those B-roll files like a couple of months around. So for example, when I'm making a second or third video, I'm just going to reuse some older footage. But I probably never use any footage that is really old. I can always just go back to YouTube, download the video, or maybe I just keep track of the video files, but not about all of the different raw footage files that really get big in size. So that is also something that I personally, I completely went too crazy with those requirements. I thought I need such a big storage server. And in the end, what happened is I bought so many hard drives, I bought a big storage controller, a big server case that all costs so much money. And in the end, I'm not using it anymore because the power consumption went completely crazy. So there was really a bad planning, right? And it's not really a technical mistake that I did, because in a technical way, I did most of the things right. I mean, you have probably seen those videos. There are some very specific, small minor mistakes and improvements that I've done over the time, but it wasn't really a technical mistake that I did. I've chosen the right operating system, I've chosen the right hardware and equipment for that. But I completely set my goals and requirements to a completely different level. So if I just would have thought clearly about my requirements and thought, okay, well, I just need a small shared storage. Maybe it should be a fast storage pool for some virtual machine disks or some backups. Okay, that's fine. Maybe for container storage, maybe databases. But I'm totally fine with, I would say, like 12 terabyte, for example, right? And I could split that easily up into 4 hard drives, right? Or maybe even into 2 or 3. And that would have been enough, right? Maybe like 1 or 2 SSDs for redundant fast storage pool. That's totally fine. I don't need much more. And by the way, that's also a small teaser what my next storage server build will be in the future. So I'm planning to build a new storage server somewhere in the middle of this year that has all those specific requirements. So I'm planning to make a smaller build with like 4 hard drives. I've not decided if I'm going to use my old 4 terabyte drives that I already bought, or if I'm investing into like 8 or 12 terabyte hard drives. But I'm also like building a slower storage pool for all of my video footage and backups, and a fast storage pool for virtual machine disks or container storage. And that's it, right? I don't need a big crazy case or anything like this. It's going to be a smaller build. It's going to be much more power efficient, and I hope you're going to enjoy it as well. But that's it about like the golden rules or my certain observations based on some of the mistakes that I've done. And yeah, I think that is really important. And I suppose I can't be the only stupid idiot on the in the world that falls or falls for this. So I'm pretty sure you guys might also have done mistakes in a similar way, like thinking about, oh, I need this, I need this, I need that, and in the end, you're not using it, and or you might just yeah. In German, you would say, ein bisschen übers Ziel hinausgeschossen, which is like you have gone a little bit too crazy, right? Okay, yeah. But yeah, that's. I see a lot of you guys agree with me here in the chat. Also, like the problem with most Homelab setups from channels like LTT is that they don't have these high prices for electricity like we in Germany have. Yeah, that's actually part of the problem, I would say. But it's also like, if you think about how much big storage server builds cost in terms of hard drives, in terms of like hardware investments and so on, it's also pretty, yeah, huge investment that you could actually save. Yeah, in the end, a home lab is for experimenting, and you can save some money if you don't set your goals too high, right? I want it. Yeah, it's probably true. I mean, it's the problem is really like most of the stuff that we are using in a home lab, we actually don't need. I mean, I could shut down my home lab and it's not going to hurt my life drastically, right? But I just want to run it, so it's like I just love to play around with this stuff. Okay, guys. So, yeah, one addition I would say to this, because it comes up in the chat, is about like cloud, which is like, is cloud an alternative? Honestly, I would say I don't like this idea much. I mean, it's like cloud solves a completely different purpose than running a home lab for me personally. I know in the beginning of my home lab project, I would have said something different. I would have said, like, sure, a cloud can also be a home lab. But just in the recent months, I came to the conclusion that cloud is a completely different set of skills. And it mostly doesn't relate so well with any home lab. So I'm planning to reduce the number of video tutorials that are about cloud solutions drastically, and try to make more videos about how to replace certain services in a home lab. Not because of privacy reasons or those type of things, but mostly about I'm really interested in finding out how exactly to build my own systems. And for professional IT, I mean, we all rely on cloud services from AWS and GCP and Azure in our day-to-day job. That's, I mean, you can't do anything against it, but it is really interesting to know how to replace those things in your own home lab. All right, so let's jump into more specific areas. And what can I recommend in terms of home lab planning when it comes to the technical aspects, right? We talked a lot about organizational stuff, requirements, and all those dry topics, yeah, I know. But they are really important. However, let's talk about some very specific things here. So what is important to plan when it comes to the different main areas of a home lab? And I try to come up with a few sections. You could probably add a few more, but I think the most important sections for me personally in a home lab include networking, workloads, storage, backups, security, monitoring, and automation. And let's talk about all of those areas a bit. I will give you some ideas on why it's important to plan certain things and so on. All right, so let's start with networking. Networking is, I just always think about networking the first. I don't know why. Maybe it is because of the experience at work that I have when it comes to networking. I don't know. But I'm not really like just a networking guy. I'm more I try to jump around all those different topics, but networking is always, for some reason, it always comes first in my mind. I don't know why. I need to drink something from time to time. All right. So let's talk about network planning. Has any of you already planned a network? Or did you just connect all the different devices you have and think about it the second? Or you try to you reach a certain threshold, like, oh, I don't have any ports left on my switch, so I probably should buy another switch. That would be really interesting to know how exactly that happens, because I'm somebody who actually tries to plan the network before everything else. I mean, it's like, I don't know why, but it's like I always thinking first about, so how many devices do I actually have in my home lab? How much stuff do I plan to run there? So in terms of, so how should I start outlining my home lab structure? I also went a bit too crazy with IP address ranges, because I thought, well, my IP address range, like a 24 subnet mask, is not sufficient for my home lab, so I probably should go with a /16 subnet mask for my home lab, for each of the VLANs, of course, right? Not just for the entire home lab. No, I also have one /16 network for every of my VLAN, or my network zones, so to speak. Which is absolutely crazy, and I bet nobody has actually more than 253 devices. But anyway, it might happen. Because when we also talk about like virtualization, maybe containerization, if you want to give like each and every container a separate IP address, I mean, you probably can reach that threshold. But realistically, I don't believe home labs need more than a /24 subnet mask. But it might happen in some scenarios. And I also thought, like, okay, let's go with a different classification for my network IP ranges, because they are just easier to remember. So I didn't start with the 192.168 whatever. Yeah, I started with a 10 dot. And then I have, like, for each of those different network zones, I have a different number. So I can easier remember those. Just for example, like 10.10 is my private network, 10.20 is my server /DMZ, whatever you want to call it, my protected zone. And 10.50, for example, is my management network. And then I use different IP ranges for those certain. So I try to categorize those specific environments also in different IP address ranges. So the entire network subnet, or the entire network, is like 10.20 /16. But then I also have one IP address range that varies from 10.20.0 to, like, yeah, and then 254 different host addresses, which are my static VMs that I use on Proxmox, for example. Then I also have a different IP address range, which is 10.20.3, which I'm and then also 254 addresses that I only use for my load balancers, for example. Then I also have 10.20.4, which I only use for temporary VMs and so on. So I try to categorize those, because then it's easier for me to remember those IP addresses and where those IP addresses belong to. It's also important to, when you're thinking about IP address ranges, and you're thinking of organizing them somehow in ranges, and you try to keep it simple, and it's also important to keep notes of all those IP addresses. So I have a table where I'm writing down all of the IP addresses and the servers they are belonging to. In the future, I'm planning to use an application for this, because currently it's a manual task, and it's actually not that big of a deal, because I don't often install new servers. But when I do, I have to pick another free IP address from one of the ranges, depending on what type of environments it is. So it's like thinking about those device IP management and so on. Yeah, it's not just DNS. It's like it's Netbox is actually the right application that I'm planning to review in the future. I haven't gone to it, but yeah, someday I probably will use that to have a better like inventory of all those IP addresses. It also gives me a cool idea of I try to somehow connect it with Ansible so that my Ansible inventories are already like connected to Netbox. That would be amazing if that somehow works. I have no idea, but that's at least my plan. And yeah, I don't need help. I just need time. So it's like, but thank you so much, Sebastian. So if you have some ideas, I mean, put it on Discord. That would be cool, and we can continue discussing about Netbox. I know Netbox is on my backlog list to review for like about more than a year or so. But yeah, it's with all of my recent projects. Just need some time. But it's important to keep track of IP addresses, organize your networks. I already covered VLANs. VLANs, I don't know if VLANs are necessary for home labs. I think like you probably can also run many home labs without VLANs. And there's also a lot of confusion about like subnetting versus VLANs, right? A lot of people assume like network segmentation, like in terms of subnetting, is VLANs, which is not the case, right? But I think it's someday I need to make follow-up videos on this because, yeah, there's just too much confusion. And it's actually a big difference if you're implementing VLANs and you're like using tagged and untagged ports on your switch to isolate different VLANs from each other, or if you're just giving different machines put them in a different subnet, which is like they can still connect in all other subnets. So there is no real device that actually tells the device, hey, you're part of this specific network and you're not able to reach other networks without having to go through a gateway. I mean, I don't want to make it too complicated. Maybe that's a topic that we need to cover in specific videos, but that's actually important. Okay, yeah, so that's really important. Of course, you first need to plan, so how many networks do you actually need? As I said, most home labs are probably fine with just a single network, but if you're into, like, you want to experiment with network security, policies, network scanning, and so on, it's probably better to start segmenting your network or try to implement VLANs in order to isolate those networks physically from each other, or like virtually using a switch. But it's like really important to think about the requirements. So let's go back to our original question. Why do you actually want to do that? So in terms of security, of course, it's best practice to isolate important networks from less important networks. But I think in terms of home labs, it's also fine to just use a single network. I would say, like, if your requirement is to to experiment with network security, then I would say, okay, it is definitely a requirement to go and use VLANs. And then you also need to plan, so what is the switch or the device that you're connecting those devices with each other. If you don't have a managed switch that is not capable of VLANs, for example, you can't do VLANs. You might just try it out with devices and computers, but you can't really on a switch layer decide, hey, this port is going to be part of VLAN XYZ, and the other port is only part of another VLAN, and this is my trunk port, and so on. So you have, like, if you want to experiment with VLANs, I think you just need a switch. You need that flexibility to really play around with that. So that's why I think it's really important to find out, do you actually want to go into that direction? And that also makes the decision easier in terms of what equipment do you actually need for it. Also, like any other plannings, like how much network throughput are you planning? Do you need 10 gigabit? Are you okay with 1 gigabit? Or maybe you want to buy a 2.5 gigabit switch. I think 2.5 becomes the new standard these days. So there are just a few devices that still operate on 1 gigabit. So I think, like, most devices have 2.5 around, at least the modern devices. So I think, like, investing in a 2.5 gigabit switch would be beneficial. So I think that is what you probably should do at least. And if you're really crazy like me, you probably also want to go a bit higher and jump into the 10 gigabit sphere. Not that you actually need it, but yeah, if you're copying a lot of data, it's important. If you're planning to run virtual machine disks from a NAS storage that has a fast storage pool, 10 gigabit is going to be a requirement for you as well. But yeah, these are all the questions that you should ask yourself when you're planning the network for your home lab. And again, you can always expand later. You can get another switch, but I know from my own experience that those switches are pretty expensive. So if you want to get a managed switch like a 24 port or maybe a 48 port switch that might also have PoE on board and 10 gigabit, I mean, it's at least like 800-900 euros. At least that's it for me when I recently just searched for a better switch. I just realized, okay, well, maybe my 24 port PoE switch with 4 10 gigabit SFP plus ports isn't that bad. So I probably just gotta keep that one instead of upgrading to a faster. Yeah, because it's just so expensive. But that's exactly why it is so important. Just imagine you want to save like 200-300 euros and you think, oh, I'm probably not going to need like 4 10 gigabit ports. I'm okay with 2 10 gigabit ports, yeah. And I don't need PoE. I'm okay with like 1 gigabit Ethernet, 24 port. I'm saving a couple of $100. And then imagine you invest like $300-400 in a 24 port switch with 2 SFP plus cards. And then a few months later, you find out, damn, I need another 10 gigabit port. Imagine you need to upgrade to the next model, which is probably a couple of €100 more. So that's why the planning is so important. And I'm always struggling with the decision if I am going to upgrade my switch, because my switch for my current requirements is totally sufficient. I've got the 24 port. I think it's like the CS110 from Sophos, which is, if I'm correct, it's like 1 gigabit Ethernet. And there are a few ports that are 2.5, but not each port. But it's all PoE, and it's like 4 10 gigabit ports, which is not common when you're like having a 24 port switch. 24 ports usually tend to have like only 2 10 gigabit SFP plus, and I'm very happy that I have 4, so I have the ability to connect like my Proxmox cluster with a NAS storage and the firewall with 10 gigabits. So that's kind of good, a really good foundation. And yeah, honestly, I can't really talk about any specific vendors here because I don't have much experience with switch vendors. I only know like software switches, and maybe with HP I got some experience, but apart from that, I've never touched any other switch. So it's like, that's all I can say about this. But yeah, that's it about switching. And yeah, again, we can probably make an entire live stream about network planning and so on, but let's move on to the next point. We might end up not covering each and every point, and we probably need to move the Q&A session to in 2 weeks probably. But yeah, that's it. I wanted to cover this important topic. All right, so let's go and go to the next section that I want to talk about, which is workloads. And we probably can go through this a bit quicker. So I think for workloads, it's really important how many services and apps you are planning to run. That's, of course, an important metric. However, I also would say, like, you don't have to be very specific about it. So if you're starting with, hey, I might just need, like, a web server, a database server, maybe a password manager, and a Homelab dashboard. So these are like 5 services, okay? And in a few months, you find out, oh man, I probably need like 20 services more. That's usually not a big deal. Applications don't consume that much resources. You could actually go and install more applications on a server most of the time. Like when it comes to requirements in a Homelab, we luckily have very less requirements when it comes to computing performance, unless you're doing something really crazy with it, like, I don't know, GPU acceleration because you're streaming movies or whatever. Again, that's not me, so I can talk about that. I'm in the lucky position that I personally never run out of resources, at least not computing resources. And if I need more memory for any application, I just add more memory to it. Memory is something you can easily upgrade to your hardware, so it's not such a big deal. But you probably should think about a memory in terms of, so for running virtual machines, I probably would go at least with 32 gigabytes. So more is always good, but less than 32 gigabytes is probably not enough. So at least for my personal requirements, you might have different requirements, but when you want to run a couple of VMs, you probably need that. So that's in terms of workloads. If you need more workloads, you want to run many more VMs, sure, more is better. So you need to somehow calculate it a bit, what resources you're going to need. But for me personally, I always can save some resources when I just shut down some VMs that I don't need. And then the resources are free again for other workloads that I can start. So a good planning in that sense, also important, helps you. But of course, it's really important to plan what type of operating system do you need. Linux, Windows, maybe more. Do you want to use containers? Do you want HA? That's going to make the discussion a lot more difficult, of course. But all those requirements you have to find out. Well, Sergio, I can't really answer that question for you if 32 gigabytes is enough, because it all depends on the workloads. That's why I said this is such an important area to plan. And I also have to say, maybe I'm making a video about this because I've seen those type of comments on my recent video about the Minis forum. Why it does not have ECC memory, so you're not running it. And I've seen that comment a couple of times. And I just want to say, and I know, if you would have asked me like 2 years ago, I would have said, yeah, ECC memory might be important or might be interesting to take a look at. If you ask me now, I will always say don't care about ECC or not. Just don't use ECC in Homelab. Why should you? It's like, and I know a lot of people will go in a fight with me about it, but I don't really care. It's just my opinion. You are not going to need ECC memory in a Homelab. In no situation. I just don't see any scenario where you should need it. Maybe I'm making a video about it, and then I will explain probably in a bit more detail, but that's my opinion about ECC memory. All right. Whoa, this is really a topic that is exhausting to talk about, honestly. I'm just realizing, whoa, there's so much stuff we could talk about. I mean, I could actually make one entire live stream about each of those topics. Maybe I'm going to do that because we haven't covered half of the list that I wanted to cover. No, I would never use ECC memory, and I also wouldn't use it for storage. I mean, why? Why should you use it for storage in a Homelab? It's like, just a minute, what could go wrong? You don't need to think about, is it recommended? You have to think about what will happen in the worst case. And does it actually make a difference to your setup, right? Just imagine and I've tried to validate information about ECC memory on storage systems, and there is always the general recommendation around, if you're building a storage server, you're going to need ECC memory. And yeah, that might be true for traditional file systems. In terms of ZFS, I've seen different opinions about it. I've seen some people saying ECC memory is important on any file system as well as on ZFS, as it is on ext4 or on NTFS. Some others said, On ZFS, you don't need error correction because ZFS has error correction built in. So ZFS by design will notice if there is an error in the file system and it will never write it to the disk. Some say this way, some say others. I say I don't care at all because the similar reason is like I've never really heard of many cases where running ECC memory has helped them, right, in any way. And if you heard about some of those cases, what could happen in the worst case, right? Like, if it's them, like the real worst case scenario is an error is written back to your disk. It damages your entire file system. The entire pool is damaged. You don't have any data. The entire pool is completely lost. Well, what should you do? And let's go into those two topics here. We can actually make and cover this in one, like storage and backups. And what I'm going to say now is not going to surprise you. If you're planning a storage, you also should plan your backups. Like, so when you're building a storage server, you should also have a backup of the entire pool somewhere on a separate device, or maybe at least on some separate disk with a separate storage controller and all those things, right? Maybe you can also, like in the old days, I've just connected a USB drive to my server and just every night ran an incremental backup job that backups the entire pool to a USB drive. And yeah, when something damages your file system and there's something wrong, you can always copy back the backup and restore the entire pool. The reason why you don't want this in a professional environment, in a production environment, is downtime. So restoring an entire storage pool can take, I don't know, it can take hours. I've once tried to back up a storage pool in a hospital where a ransomware decrypted the entire storage server. And this was a deduplication. So it actually took me 2.5 days to restore the entire pool from the deduplicated storage back to the original pool. And that was pretty terrifying for the whole hospital. But in the end, I mean, surgeries could go on, patients could go and, yeah, be served by the doctors and so on. The fact that the patient system was down for like 2.5 days was terrible, but it was over the weekend, and in the end, it all worked again. So it finally, yeah, the biggest problem with that wasn't like that it is down. That in the production environment, it is important that you keep your systems up and running for as long as you can, because every downtime costs money, right? So if you're running a service, for example, and you have customers and your customers can't work, or maybe you're working in a company where you can't produce items because like the CNC machines can't connect to the storage server to download the construction manuals and whatsoever, and your company can't produce materials and you're losing money because of that, then it's going to make a huge difference if a company can't work for an hour or maybe for 2 days, right? So it's going to, some companies, it will cost millions of dollars. And that is why we have ECC memory, and why we have redundancy, and why we have HA. And all those things are great. But just think about your home lab, right? Your home lab as an experimental playground to play around with technologies and so on. What actually happens, or will it actually damage your life or make it your life worse if you can't access your storage pool for a day, or maybe for a week, maybe for 2 weeks? I mean, yes, it would be an inconvenience. It would be annoying. It would be completely chaos. But you would not lose any money. Yeah. And after restoring the backup, you could just go on and live your life. And that is exactly the reason why I say ECC memory is not necessary, because no one actually cares if the restoring process takes a week or a day or an hour. So just don't bother about ECC, because in like 99% of the cases, nothing will happen to you. And if you're one of those, those persons that run into this problem, then restore your storage pool from a backup and you're fine. So like, for me personally, it's not worth like paying like twice or 3 times the money for a new memory module just because it has ECC. But that's just for me. Like, I mean, a lot of people might disagree with me here, but that's just how I see it. I know it was a long explanation to this question, but yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's like it comes back to thinking about the requirements. Don't focus on tech and just on tech and think about just because somebody else in a YouTube video said, oh, you need ECC for this and that because you have read it in a Wikipedia article or in a best practice section of the TrueNAS documentation. That you need to do that. Think about your requirements. Think about the implications and the impact that the loss of a storage pool would have to you. And if your answer is, okay, great, I'm going to take care of my backups anyway, that's totally fine. And this is also a way how you should plan your storage and your backups. Also the same discussion, you could also think about like offsite backups. I mean, in a production environment, offsite backups are important. I had once a situation where a customer of our organization, so we were IT service technicians deploying servers to customers, and this was a company that produced cakes. So it was a bakery, and they produced a lot of cakes and a lot of other bakery stuff, so really delicious. But the problem with that is a fire completely destroyed the entire storage area of that company. So like this was a huge disaster. Like everyone in the region talked about this. And they had like 2 servers with multiple hard drives. And there were big storage servers having all the important emails of the entire company and so on. And somebody from the company went into the burning building to pull out all the hard drives and run away as fast as he could. And I know I wasn't there at this day because I was on holiday, luckily, but my boss was there. And they were in, so when the building was burning and they pulled out the hard drives, they of course didn't write down which hard drive was in which port. So when we tried to replace or try to rebuild the storage pool, we didn't know in which port those hard drives were plugged in. And guess what happens? Like we couldn't actually access it, and it took us a pretty long time to recover it. But that was actually a big problem. And so we thought about, well, if we have a new customer selling them a storage server, should we actually sell them a cloud service plan of a Acronis cloud backup as well? Maybe that's a good idea. But again, like just think about this situation. Like if you're in a company and your entire office burns down, a company needs to exist, of course. So you can rent a new office, you can build a new server, you can restore the data and so on. Just imagine this happens to your home lab, right? The place where you are running your home lab is mostly your home, and a fire is destroying your home. That is an offsite backup is probably the least thing I was thinking about, right? So it's like this is really the day where I would be so happy to be alive and my family isn't hurt, or I could get everything in my house, like my furnitures and everything, like save them and so on. Like my home server storage would be the least thing I was thinking about. So if you ask me, the question is if an offsite or a cloud backup of your home lab storage pool is important, I would say no. Because what could happen if something is, your house is burning down? You have other big problems. Yeah, so this. No, so I mean, yeah, you probably can find out my address and now and shred my home lab to pieces. I don't have a cloud backup somewhere, right? Is it? Oh man, guys, you're really so funny with some of the comments here. But yeah, that's it about this, right? So for me personally, I don't need an offsite backup of my Homelab somewhere because, yeah, when something happens to my Homelab anyway, so the fire damages something, I have other problems than restoring the backup of my containers. Again, this is, by the way, also why I personally, I mean, this is probably a bit different when you're thinking about like self-hosting password managers or something like that. You have to keep in mind, I'm somebody who doesn't run his own password managers. So I'm using software as a service for password managers. I have iCloud for storing all my pictures and photos. So, like, if something actually happens to my personal environment, I mean, it would be annoying, but it wouldn't be the end of the day, the end of the world, right? So I could go and restore all of those different things somewhere from a like software as a service that holds all my critical and my important data. But yeah, of course, I'm taking backups of my storage server. In case something happens, I can restore them from a backup. But I'm not taking this backup and put it outside of my house or somebody else. So I don't really put it somewhere in the cloud, right? This is what we're talking about. Do I need to protect my server inside a bunker so it doesn't burn? Yeah, maybe. Maybe. All right. So yeah, as you can see, I'm really, when it comes to safety, I'm probably, yeah, you probably can argue with me and say, well, there are a couple of things that are a bit dangerous that I do, but I'm also a maniac, right? So I sometimes I love the thrill of upgrading a production server without taking a snapshot first. I'm a bit crazy when it comes to that, probably. But yeah, what could go wrong? I mean, in the end, if something really messes up, you got some lessons learned, so you're not doing it the second time. That's how I'm thinking about it. No, really. I mean, there are stupid things you should avoid, but try to be 100% secure for each and everything in your Homelab is also insane. It's probably the same opinion I have about security, because I in like the last live stream, I also said like trying to be 100% secure is an impossible job anyway. So your goal should not be to become as secure as possible. Your goal should be to become as secure as it is required. So to catch like 99% of the most common attacks and stupid things. The same is also true for like storage and backups, right? It's not about like, I don't know, taking an incremental backup job each and every minute and then uploading this to cloud storage. I mean, I'm taking backups every day. Of course, if I'm doing something wrong at the wrong time of the day, I could actually lose a day of work. That can happen. But it's not the end of the world. You can always like recover those things. It's gonna be annoying, but it's not gonna be the end of the world. So that's why I say like it's not necessary to take like a backup each and every hour and upload this somewhere to cloud. All right, so I'm about to finish the live stream in a few minutes. I mean, we haven't covered some topics that I wanted to cover, like security, monitoring, and automation. And I also would love to give you some ideas of how I'm keeping track of projects, like how I'm writing down when I'm planning my Homelab, how do I keep track of the things that I have, and how do I write down and take notes of all the researching that I do. But I think it could probably be interesting to make another live stream about it and go in a bit more detail, because I'm already planning a video on note taking and tools about note taking, because some of you might know I've recently done a video about Obsidian and Markdown editing, but I'm using a different system since a few weeks, and I'm probably also going to make a video about this. And it could be cool to make a follow-up video on giving you some details about how exactly do I write my projects down and what exactly do I keep track of. I think that could be interesting as a separate live stream topic, and also maybe not security because we already covered security in a recent or a past live stream. And logging and monitoring, I don't have much to say because I never really handled those topics sufficiently in my home lab. But maybe automation would be something we could think more about. Maybe also something like today's live stream, more talking about concepts, talking about ideas, and not just showing specific solutions and examples. That should be part of the video. So more like an open discussion about all those things. So yeah, it's yeah, I'm interested in that. Yeah, cool. That's awesome to hear. Yeah, I know that this will be this topic about note-taking programs. I am assuming this will be a fight again. I mean, just imagine my video about the warp terminal. I think, and by the way, I'm planning to make a follow-up video on this. Because I'm trying to compare warp terminal to a different terminal program. That's gonna be, oh my god, yeah, that's gonna be crazy. I know the comment section will be, yeah. Yeah, I'm really excited about those type of videos. But honestly, I'm not making videos because I want to be in a safe space or I want just friendly comments. I really think those videos are valuable. So talking about terminal programs, no matter if they're open source or not, or talking about note-taking tools, no matter if they're open source or not, really, I think this is really valuable because it shows you exactly how I'm working with those systems and what is my opinion about that. And yeah, sure, if there are people not so friendly about it because I didn't cover their favorite open source tool, well, so be it. I always try to be open and honest and transparent with you guys. And I'm not lying to you and saying, hey, I only use free and open source tools. I just tell you the truth and tell you what I'm using and why I'm using it this way. So that's why we have to cover Warp Terminal and compare it to a different one as well. And also Obsidian to another note-taking system. So these are also some follow-up videos I'm planning. We will see. Do you do deep SSL on softwares which you have? No, I don't. And it's also like one of those reasons why, because I recently had this discussion. I mean, I could easily go and do TLS inspection and so on, but why should I do it? It's for me personally, for my family, and for my home lab, it's not necessary. So it's like it always goes back to the requirements. What I said in the beginning. It's if you're planning anything in your home lab, it's so important to carefully think about your requirements. What do you actually need? Is it important or is it not important? And so on. Okay, guys, so, well, I might do a separate Q&A session to this because there are so many great questions and I would love to cover them, but today time is running out. So let's catch up in 2 weeks again. I'll prepare another topic for the live stream and I try to make it a bit shorter, so not such a wide topic, so we can have some more time for Q&A sessions like in the last 20 minutes or so. I think that would be great. And by the way, if there is anything you want to ask me now and you definitely need an answer right now, then send me a message on Discord. I always try to answer every message I get on Discord. It might just take a day or two until I have time to answer, but I probably always try and reply to each and every question I get. Okay, guys, so thanks for watching. Again, would be cool to see you on Discord, to support me on Patreon. That would be so great. I see a lot of interest in Patreon, and I think this is really a good program because it allows me to get some more freedom and do something besides the regular YouTube algorithm or what YouTube actually wants me to cover on YouTube. So any support is heavily appreciated from your side, and it shows me, okay, this is what you guys are interested in. And let's catch up in 2 weeks. Thanks everybody for watching. Have a nice rest of your day, and I see you in the next video. Thanks for being here. Bye bye, everybody. Ciao.